Well, still watching Business Morning, we get to our first conversation of the day, and it's about taxes. Not a very pleasant one for a lot of businesses, but do remember that President Bola Tinubu had postponed the implementation of the 2022 Finance Act, and it begins on Friday, the 1st of September. Certain provisions were amended to begin on the 1st. I want to find out what these provisions are and how it will affect you as a business person or as an individual. So we have an expert, a tax expert, joining us virtually now to discuss this. Mr. Martins Aroge's partner, tax regulatory and people services decision, and also tax ESG lead with KPMG, joins us virtually from Lagos. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Aroge. Good morning.
Hi, good morning. It's a pleasure joining you this morning.
Good to have you. So, going right into it, we know that VAT has had a lot of amendment in this Finance Act that comes into play from Friday. For instance, the VAT withheld or collected shall now be remitted on or before the 14th of the month. What does that mean? How does that change anything that has been in existence before now?
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, you are right in saying that one of the changes that were introduced or that would be introduced by the Finance Act, because we are still about 2 days away from the 1st of September, is that VAT deducted at source will now be remitted on the 14th rather than the 21st of the month, which was what typically happened. So what used to happen in the past was that there was the same timeline for remitting VAT. It didn't matter what the source of that VAT was, whether it was VAT that you charged and collected from your vendors, or whether it was VAT that you charged and collected from your customers, or whether it was VAT that you were charged by your vendors and that you then deducted as source because you have been appointed as an agent of the Federally Land Revenue Service to deduct VAT at source. So they've just separated the timelines for remitting both forms of VAT. Going forward, the timeline for remitting VAT that you are charged by your vendor and which you then proceed to deduct instead of paying it over to your vendor, that will now be due on the 14th of every month, while the VAT that you then collect from customers, that you will then file and remit on the 21st of every month. It's all about trying to get in these revenues faster and quicker, and ensuring that government has access to money that they believe belongs to them a lot more quicker.
A lot more quicker, but you also have the issue of monitoring it. I guess that the regulator or FIRS will not expect this to start immediately. It's supposed to start from the 14th of September. There's supposed to be remittance on the 14th of September.
That's a very thorny issue. In the past, what we've always argued that tax laws should not be retroactive. And there is actually a judgment that tends to support that. And if you look at the national tax policy, one of the framework on which it was written is also supports the fact that the tax laws should never be applied retroactively. Now, if you say that the effective date is 1st of September, then the expectation is that only transactions that occur after the effective date should be impacted by the change in law. So if you are only going to consider transactions that occur after the 1st of September, what that means is that the first month in which you would expect a double set of returns should be October, and that the first set of those returns will be 14th of October. However, the tax authorities tend to apply it a bit differently and tend to see it a bit differently. So they've issued a public notice in which they've stated that from the 14th of September, they expect to see companies that are impacted by this change filing the first set of returns. What that means is that the transactions that will be covered in the returns filed on the 14th of September would primarily be transactions that occurred in August, which is before the effective date of the Finance Act. So that's a contentious matter, but that's where we are in terms of what the tax authorities is currently demanding from taxpayers.
Yeah, but I guess they're also taking into consideration the fact that this was supposed to have started months ago. It was President Tinubu that moved it to the 1st of September, I believe.
Yeah, and when you were introducing it, you basically used the word postponement. That's not the word I would use for two basic reasons. The first one is that if you look at the Finance Act in itself, it does not clearly state an effective date. It says, or it provides some sort of leeway. It says any date that the president may decide by an act or order. So it gives the president the leeway to determine the effective date. What President Tinubu essentially did as soon as he settled in office was to then issue an order to state what that effective date would be, which is 1st of September. So I would not use the word postponement. I think the president used the provisions of the law as passed by the National Assembly and the powers that it conferred on him to set the effective date. Secondly, if you look at again, I will refer back to the national tax policy. It says that companies ought to be given the right to properly understand, study a change in law and make plans for the effective implementation. And the national tax policy suggests that a timeline of between 3 to 6 months is what they believe, or what it believes is an effective timeline between when a law is passed and when the effective date should be when it comes to tax laws and tax policies. Now, this law was passed or was assented to by the president, the outgoing president, on the 28th of May. So if you look at the timeline between then and 1st of September, that would be roughly around 3 months, which is primarily the minimum window provided for in the national tax policy. So I think that the president, all he was trying to do when he set the effective date as 1st September was to align it with what government has issued as its own tax policy. So yes, I wouldn't say it was postponed. I wouldn't say it was delayed. I would say that it was made to align with government's own policy as enshrined in the national tax policy, and was within the powers conferred on the president in issuing that order.
All right. So another change is the exclusion of items, VAT on items from building. They said any fixture or structure that can be easily removed. What does that imply?
Okay. So what in the past, there was the definition of building that we had in the past tended to cover everything that was fixed to the ground. But we know that not everything that is fixed to the ground has a degree of permanence. It's possible that some things may be fixed to the ground because that is how you need them to work at a particular point in time. However, I won't use the word minimal effort. With some effort, you can easily move those things to a different location at any point in time that you so desire. So what the law has tried to do is to say what we consider building are only fixtures that are fixed to the ground with a degree of permanence. They cannot be easily moved. So if you have a telecommunications mast, for example, even though it is fixed to the ground, we know that if you so desire, you can decommission it and move it to a different location at any point in time. So basically what the law has basically tried to do is clarify the definition of building and attach that degree of permanence as a classifier for what we qualify as building.
So what does it mean to the build industry or as an individual who is involved in building now? What does it mean to such a person?
It may not change much for those in construction, actual building construction. Where you may have an impact will primarily most likely be in telecommunications. Because like I said, items such as the telecommunication mast that would ordinarily have qualified as buildings in the past and so would have been able to enjoy that exemption would no longer enjoy the exemption. So the cost of renting those masts, especially when you consider the state of telecommunications industry today, where most of the telecoms providers typically rent or pay some service tax for use of co-location masts as you have spread over most part of the country. So it would most likely drive up the cost for telecommunication service providers That's where I think the major impact will be felt.
All right. Then we have the Tertiary Education Tax. Went up from 2.5 to 3%. And here we thought that President Bola Tinubu would have a friendlier face. You know, we had thought, I mean, because there were a lot of criticism when this Finance Act was amended last year before its implementation. You know, they're supposed to start this year. A lot of businesses or stakeholders in the real sector are not happy with the changes because it means more for them, cost them more. And now we see that we're still stuck with the increases, especially in this case. I mean, among other things, even stricter taxes. How does it fit into his administration?
Now, it's difficult to say how it fits into the administration of the current president, given that this law was passed prior to his assumption of office. We need to be very clear that this law was assented to by President Muhammadu Buhari on the 28th of May. What all the current president has done so far is set an effective date for its implementation. I'm not going to go into whether it fits into his overall policy on tax and business that are trying to grow business. But I do understand where companies are coming from when they say, especially when they say that this may be an additional burden that they can do without, given the tough operating conditions that we see currently for companies in the country. The rate was 2% a few years ago. So in the life of the President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, it was changed twice, first to 2.5% and now to 3%. And like I said, I do understand when companies say that this may be a bit more too much for them, given the additional burden that they are having to face with the increase in operational costs and cost of doing business generally in the country. The corollary, the alternative argument to all of this would be to say that the education sector in Nigeria actually needs all of these resources in order to ensure that we are able to address the challenges we see in the sector in terms of infrastructure. So yes, there is an argument for and against the increase.
Yeah, well, some people will ask you if it actually gets to the education sector and we're experiencing strikes more months in the year than, you know, days when students are in class. So, I mean, there's so many arguments to that. But let me not take you through that. Let me not take you through that. But let me just ask. Well, let me ask, isn't it possible, of course, we do know that it was assented to by the past president, the immediate past President Buhari. Isn't it possible for an amendment if President Bola Tinubu says he wants to encourage economic activities, he's even asked for a single-digit interest rate? You know, he's formed a committee to look into tax reforms. Isn't it possible for the Finance Act? Is it cast in stone? Can it not be amended?
The simple answer to that question is yes, it can be amended. And yes, you can change the law. The Finance Act is actually changing the law, so you can issue another Finance Act that changes or amends the law. And if you look at, we've issued Finance Acts consecutively for a few years. I think the first one was the Finance Act of 2019. So we've done this annually for the last 4 or 5 years. So yes, we can change the law. But I think the bigger issue for me isn't about changing the law. It's about seeing what drove the change in the first place. What sort of studies did we do that necessitated that change in the first place? What are the impact and the effect that we've seen from the change since it's been introduced? How does that tally with the studies that we did before we introduced the change? Because, and it's not just about the education tax or the Finance Act 2023. I think it's all about our holistic approach to taxation in Nigeria. What are we looking to drive? What sort of behavior, what sort of change are we looking to engender with every change that we introduce? And I think we ought to step back after we introduce this change and say, have we been successful with our initial objective? And what do we need to tweak to be able to get us back to that objective? It's something we should do with respect to all tax laws, not just the Tertiary Education Tax Act.
All right, thank you. Just before we let you go, I know before now, it used to be that businesses pay about 40% of their profit as tax. What is it now? Did you know?
The company's income tax rate in Nigeria for large...
No, I mean accumulation of all the taxes that they have to pay.
It's difficult to put a number because it changes from company to company. So what you can only put a number to is the baseline rates. In terms of what the effective rate will be for every company, there are a number of other considerations that you put into account. There are taxable expenses, non-taxable non-deductible expenses, taxable income, non-taxable income. So it's not something you can throw a number off the top of your head. It changes from company to company.
All right, thank you so much for this enlightenment, Mr. Martin Saroge, Partner, Tax, Regulatory and People Services Division with KPMG. I appreciate your perspective.
Thank you very much.